Hello and welcome to Relatable Code. In this video, we're going to make a direct application on classes in Kotlin. So let's get started. So in this video, we're going to make a new project in IntelliJ. I named it Classroom. And in this Classroom project, here are your requirements. Okay. You have to think of a case where you have to model a classroom of students. Okay, every student should have a name, an age, and a grade. Every classroom should have a list of students. So I want you to create a program that takes these students and returns the student with the highest grade in this classroom. Okay? Pause this video, try to do this on your own, and let's do it. Okay, so first thing you're going to need, if you read the requirements carefully, you need to have two different classes. Okay? A class called classroom and a class called student. Whenever you're trying to model a problem, especially in object-oriented programming, you have to start with the classes. Try to figure out really where the problem is and try to identify how you should tackle it. By beginning with classes, you really set up your logic so that you can start to process what a classroom looks like, what a student looks like. Okay? So let's start with the class student. We have a class student. And let's pass the required fields in the primary constructor. Okay, so we have a name. It's going to be a string. We have an age. Let's say it's an integer. And we have a grade. Let's say it's a float. Okay. We're not going to need an implementation for this class. This will just do fine for now. And we have another class called classroom. So let's model that class, classroom. And in this class, let's try to pass the required values in the secondary constructor so that you can make sure that you covered all the concepts of constructors in classes. So this classroom will take a list of students, right? So you're going to need for students, if we can write that correctly, it's of type list of students, and it's going to have an initial value of just an empty list. Okay. When you declare a list in Kotlin, you can have it be empty by default with this notation. You say you have a variable students of type list of students, and it will be just an empty list like that. Okay, it will be just a list of. So let's try to create a secondary constructor like this. Constructor. And this constructor should take some students as a parameter. Also a list of students. We're going to implement this. Basically, we have to provide some empty parentheses for our class, classroom, so that we can write this notation, open our curly braces, and write this dot students equals to students. Okay, we can make our students variable private here. So now we have a class student and a class classroom, basically. Okay, our student uses a primary constructor and our classroom uses a secondary constructor. It's a matter of choice. You can also pass your students here. It doesn't really matter in this context, but of course it has to be a var. Okay. And this will cause a problem because you're trying to create a secondary constructor which is the same as the primary constructor, which is not very suitable. You need to pass a list of students by default if you want to create an empty constructor. Remember, this isn't necessary. Okay, This is just another way of creating your classroom if you want to have the ability to create it with an empty constructor, which we don't need for now. Let's just undo this. This is good. And now let's go to our main method. In our main method, we need to just basically create our example. So we're going to need a few students and a classroom. Okay. So let's say we have, I don't know, student 1, 2, 3 equals student 1 equals student. Let's say his name is Fair. Let's say his age is 26. Let's say his grade is 20F. Okay, Control D to duplicate it. Student 2, student 3, and student 4. Let's say student 2 is named David. Let's say student 3 has a name of Paul. Let's say student 4 has a name of Jake. Okay, let's change their ages and their grades as well. Let's say student 2 has a grade of 15, student 3 has a grade of 17, and student 3 has a grade of 11. Okay, and now we need to create our classroom so that we can pass a list of these students. Okay, so let's create val classroom equals classroom, and it has to take an input of a list of students. How can you do that? You can write list of and just pass the students one by one. Okay, student 1, student 2, student 3, and student 4. That's our classroom. And now we need to create some logic just to take these students and return the student with the highest grade. Now you can approach this in several ways. I'm going to show you one of the simplest ways. Let's create a variable, name it highest grade. It will be initially equal to 0f, and create another variable for the student with the highest grade. Okay, name it student with highest grade, and it will be just an empty string because it will be basically the name of that student. And now we need to go over these students in this classroom to check which student has the highest grade. Okay, so we can do that using a loop. And we can write classroom dot, I don't have access to students anymore because we made it private. So let's write classroom dot students dot for each. It's one of my favorite loops in Kotlin because it's very fast. Here, instead of it, as we've discussed in the video about loops, we can write something like student, which will represent every single student or the current student in this loop of this list. Okay. And now we're going to have an if statement. So we're going to write if student dot grade greater than highest grade. This means we found a student with basically a higher grade than our current marks. Okay, so what will happen? Highest grade will now change because highest grade will now reflect the grade of this student. So we can write highest grade equals student dot grade, and we can write student with highest grade equals to student dot name. And the reason why we did that is because we want to update these two variables as we go through our loop. If we find any student in this loop, in this list, with a grade that's higher than the current highest grade in our program. Okay? And that's it for now. We can write print line the most clever student is $ student with the highest grade achieving highest grade. Okay, let's run our program like this. And we don't need these, we need this. The most clever student is Taher, of course, achieving 20.0, which was true in our case because this student had the highest grade. Okay, and of course, if you give a higher grade to another student, such as Jake, for example, and rerun your program, the most clever student is now Jake, achieving 22.0. Okay, and the reason this works is because initially we had a highest grade of 0 and basically no student. It's just an empty string. We went over this loop. We found Thaer. His grade was 20, which was higher than 0. This is the first item of the loop. Okay. So our highest grade variable was updated with the grade of Thaer, and the student with highest grade variable was also updated with the student's name. Okay. Moving on to the second student, he didn't have a grade higher than 20, which was the highest grade at that moment. So this if statement was not triggered. We went on to the third student. He also didn't have a grade higher than 20, which had us go to the final student. Jake, in this case, had a grade 22F, which was higher than 20. So this if statement was triggered again because his grade was greater than the highest grade. So now highest grade reflects his grade, basically, and the student with highest grade variable reflects his name, okay, which is Jake. So now when you write this print statement, you get this output, okay? Another way you can achieve the same result using a fancy way in Kotlin is by using the operators. Okay, there's an operator that basically just does all of this for you, and that's the MaxBy operator. And here's how you can use it. You can write classroom.students.maxby, and here inside the MaxBy, you have to give it the criteria for which it will give you the maximum, which in our case is the grade. Okay, we want to go over our students list, and we need to find the maximum grade of these students. And we basically just want to print out the details of that student. And here's how you can do that. You can also write at the end .run. And in the scope of .run, you can see we have this, which is the student. And which student in our case? The student which has the maximum grade. And as I've said, this is the fancy way of doing it in Kotlin. You have a lot of operators to work with, and we will cover a lot of them in a future video. But I felt the need to tell you about this right now so that you can maybe think of alternative solutions in the future. So inside the .run scope, I can copy this print line statement, and instead of using these two variables, you can just use this student directly. So you can write this dot name achieving this dot grade. Let's comment out these. I don't think we need them anymore. And let's run our application again. We're going to have the same output, okay? And this, of course, looks a lot better than all of this code. It's a lot more concise and meaningful. But using operators in Kotlin can get a little tricky sometimes. This MaxBy operator, for example, expects a certain variable, which it will use to identify the maximum in this list. Okay? You have a lot of different operators in Kotlin. As I've said, you have an operator to filter out your students, you have an operator to print out the first student in the list, the last student in this list, and a lot of others as well. We will dedicate a separate video for operators because they are really very powerful tools in Kotlin. Okay? If you like these type of videos, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for future content, and I'll see you in the next video.